Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's live webinar, Turbocharging SharePoint Performance for Speed, Control, and Better ROI, with today's speakers, Nik Rouda, Riverbed Senior Director and Solutions Marketing, and Bill Baer, Microsoft Senior Product Marketing Manager and SharePoint Certified Master. We'll get started in a few seconds, but just to begin, I want to remind everybody that we will be having a live QA after the presentation, so feel free to enter any questions you may have in the Q&A console. And with that, welcome again, and here's Bill.
Thank you. So my name is Bill Baer. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager in our SharePoint product group here in Redmond, Washington. Today we'd like to talk a little bit about geographically dispersed deployments with SharePoint 2010. And one of the things from a SharePoint perspective that we love about the product is it gives us the ability to not only empower our users, but it also aligns our business and IT. And basically the way that we accomplish that is SharePoint provides a suite of capabilities distributed both across collaboration, social computing, and beyond. So from a SharePoint perspective, it's one of our flagship products, and it enables users to be more productive naturally. Beginning with geographically dispersed deployments, basically our geographically dispersed deployment model from a SharePoint perspective is built on three standard models. Those models consist of a centralized deployment, a regionalized deployment, and a distributed deployment. And we're going to spend a little bit of time describing what those are and what kind of scenarios lend businesses to choose those particular types of deployments. So beginning with the centralized deployment, centralized deployments are generally characterized by a centralized data center with users clustered around those. We see centralized deployments in a lot of our smaller enterprise deployments where there's a particular headquarters or clustered user base that represents the dominant audience for that deployment. Examples of that could include a company based out of Seattle where the majority of their users are also based out of Seattle. And that's typical of our centralized deployment model. As we move forward, we also have what we call our regional deployment model. A regional deployment model is very similar to a centralized deployment model where clusters of users are aligned around the data center. However, the deployments themselves are distributed geographically. This model is what we see in our larger enterprises, particularly those that have a presence across regions, but they don't necessarily have a lot of distributed users. And then lastly, we have our distributed deployment model. And this is most common of what we see in the enterprise, where we have regionalized data centers. There could be clusters of users around those regionalized data centers. However, there are remote users associated with those data centers. Our large enterprises, particularly those in oil and gas, typically follow this type of model where they have predominant sites where their deployments reside, users that are typically clustered around those to manage administrative tasks. We have our staff or our remote users that reside in satellite offices. Those satellite offices don't necessarily need to be a physical office as much as they can be, as an example, something like an oil rig, where there are users who need to access a SharePoint deployment, but they may not have the resources or the need to actually have a SharePoint deployment localized. So generally we have clustered users that access it over their corporate network, and then we have users that reside remotely that are accessing it over latent links. And those latent links could include satellite links, it could be MPLS, it could be VPN. There's a number of technologies that they would use to access the SharePoint deployment remotely. From a bandwidth perspective, we typically define our remote users as having high bandwidth, a la broadband. Continental latency in our definition is about 125 milliseconds coast to coast when you think about the United States. And then we also have global latency that we have to deal with. Continental latency is more typical of our centralized deployment models, whereas global latency is more typical of our regional and our global deployment models. From a bandwidth performance generalization, generally what we see is as latency increases, you'll see an increase in page response times. So if you think about a typical LAN user, we'll usually see about 2 seconds for a first-time page access. As we extend that deployment, you'll see that those page response times can increase significantly from 4 to 8 seconds and from 8 to 16 seconds when you think about it from a continental and a global perspective. If you think about page response times, 8 seconds is a long time to wait for a page to render based on any type of application. From a SharePoint perspective, we've done a number of things to try to help people when it comes to continental deployments and geographically distributed deployments. We've put a number of efforts into lowering latency and increasing throughput. We've added support natively for IIS-7, which means you don't have to run in a compatibility mode. And then we've also tried to reduce our initial payload by reducing image sizes and compressing scripts, reducing HTTP postbacks by making an effort to invest more and more in AJAX. And then also we've put developer focus on time to first byte, time to last byte, as well as the reduction of SQL round trips. So now we've kind of very quickly went through our regionalized, our centralized, and our geographically distributed deployment models. I'd like to turn it over to Riverbed and allow them to talk a little bit about how they can help facilitate and address some of those challenges with SharePoint.
Great. Thank you very much, Bill. This is Nik Rouda from Riverbed. I will be walking you through the second half of the presentation here and talking a little bit about some of the ways Riverbed and Microsoft complement one another. I wanted to start first at a high level and talk just briefly about the partnership we have. Riverbed is managed very closely as a partner with Microsoft. We're considered a gold certified partner, and we OEM Windows Server running on our appliances as well. We work very closely with various Microsoft application and platform teams, from SharePoint to Exchange, Office 365 to others as well. We do joint testing, and we have presence in with Riverbed in Microsoft Technology Centers around the world. So if you want to learn more about what we can do, you can come visit us live in one of those locations as well. So one of the things I wanted to really start out with looking at the approach is to understand a little bit where are we at in your life cycle with SharePoint. Oftentimes people are adopting it for the first time and defining what are the goals for it, what would they like to use it for, and that can range from documents to workflow to collaboration, or they're trying to change the way they're using it. Similarly, they may need to define the user requirements, and as Bill walked through some of the different deployment models, there can be different needs to support different users in different locations, different workloads, etc. Not least, we now need to think about architecting. How are we going to get the most successful deployment here? How are we going to be able to centralize? How are we going to give fast access to people everywhere? If we want to integrate cloud, or if we want to make sure it's well protected, what are the steps we need to do to enhance that SharePoint deployment? So just looking briefly at this, taking a couple of these in turn, if we're thinking about a global document repository, probably one of the most common use cases. Obviously, people's main goals here are to make their employees more productive, make them more collaborative, getting them working together and able to find the pieces they need when they need them. Now, some of the challenges around that is how do we get people that access, whether they're mobile access, whether they're struggling with server availability issues, whether they're just trying to find the right consistent set of workflow documents. And one of our common challenges here is it really a trade-off? It's, do we go centralized, as Bill described? If we have brought everything back to one or more data center locations, typically that implies more latency and more network contention, as Bill went through. But if we do more distributed, then obviously we need more hardware. Searching may require looking in multiple different locations. It may be more complex, and managing it can be a challenge. So one of the first things we want to look at is what is the impact of distance on that environment? If it's further away, what does that mean for the user experience and performance? And obviously it can often mean waiting for access, waiting for pages to load, etc. So one of the things we really like to do when we look at these environments is to understand what is the impact, how much delay is there for users. And Riverbed's Cascade product family is application-aware network performance management tools that can really analyze that environment. They can have a good look through at all the steps in the connection from the end user, wherever they are, oil rig shown here, or mobile worker out on a laptop or in a branch office. How do they access that central SharePoint deployment, and where are the bottlenecks along the way, or is it just distance that's getting in the way? Obviously, the idea here is if you have a tool like our network performance management, then you can really understand the environment better, and that's going to help you make much more informed decisions as you try and address these performance issues. So I guess the appropriate adage here is you can't manage what you can't measure, and Cascade gives you that end-to-end visibility. It'll look at flow data across the network as traffic goes through the various network segments. It'll also be able to do packet capture and connect the two, so you can have a enterprise view that starts at the high level but really enables you to drill down and see what does the performance look like for a given location. Are we meeting our SLAs? Are we having an outage? How do we troubleshoot, and how do we better understand that? But really probably the first place to start for many customers is a better understanding of how are people accessing it, where are they coming from, and what performance limitations they have in the way, whether it's bandwidth or latency related. The next common area we have is if we've been able to deploy Cascade into the environment is to think about improving the performance. And oftentimes people will turn to Riverbed here to say, let's deploy WAN optimization. And as probably many of our callers know, Steelhead is our WAN optimization product family, industry-leading solution to give you the best possible performance even in the face of long distances or bandwidth restrictions. So wherever you're accessing it, from a branch office, from a mobile client, from a offshore oil platform, over a satellite connection, we're going to give you the best possible performance in that environment and effectively make it feel like it's local access. And this does, again, help customers go to the configuration they'd like, maybe a few central deployments rather than a distributed environment, and get the cost savings and efficiency that consolidation brings them. WAN optimization does this in a couple of different ways, and I'll give you a quick view here in some of the techniques it's deploying into the environment that really help. First of all is to look at the nature of the traffic between that end user and the data center, and to understand how much of that traffic is actually redundant. If you're accessing a file, maybe other people in your location have accessed that same file. If we're making a change to the file and bringing it back, how much of that has actually changed? So I think what we often find is 65 to 98% of the traffic and access is actually redundant. That's information we've seen before on the network, and by deploying the Steelhead appliances on either end of the connection, you can remove that traffic from your network. So this directly addresses bandwidth limitations. If you're thinking of people moving huge files up and down over T1 or even 3G type network connections, this can go a long way to getting you more throughput by reducing the amount of traffic that needs to go. The next area that Steelhead really provides a lot of value is to optimize the TCP connections as well. So the network protocol that Sharepoint's running on, we can make that a lot more efficient, more streamlined. We can help it ramp up its throughput faster. We can help maintain that even in the face of variable bandwidth. We can really just make sure that we're getting the most efficient back and forth here. If the first set of features really addresses bandwidth, optimizing TCP is more of a latency type approach. How do we get rid of back and forth chattiness that's really going to slow things down and make that network run as efficiently as possible? Third area we've done is to work directly with application protocols themselves, whether that's HTTP, the web protocol you're accessing, Sharepoint via in a browser, or HTTPS if we're a secure environment, or whether it's the Sharepoint protocols itself, as Sharepoint is authenticating users as they visit a page or start to browse or try to download different files. It needs to keep re-authenticating. So we found ways to do some of those acknowledgments locally and make the web page more efficient, maybe pre-populate portions of it or cache portions of the static content of that web page, but always give people fresh access to the actual content of the file systems and directories they're trying to access. So this is another layer 7 or application level approach to working around high latency or long distances in the network between the user and the Sharepoint repository. The last area we look at is what can we do to give more visibility, analysis, and control? And I mentioned Cascade is a great way to get visibility, but the Steelheads themselves also can do great reporting and show you what kind of benefit you're getting from some of the above optimizations. We can also use the Steelhead WAN optimization to use quality of service in this environment. And you may decide you want to prioritize access to Sharepoint over other types of traffic. Obviously, it's probably more important that people go get their files and upload and download from Sharepoint than they go to YouTube and browse cat videos. So QoS is a great way to prioritize the traffic on the network and really differentiate it. They may both look like web traffic at the base level. HTTP is how you'd access Sharepoint. It's how you'd access YouTube. But how do we prioritize within that? And our QoS is a great fine-grained approach to understanding that traffic and prioritizing appropriately. And as a result, we get a very, very positive impact on Sharepoint deployments and access. Here I have 3 different examples. These were based on a benchmark tests done in a lab, but real-world examples back these up quite frequently. You can see in these charts, the bottom bar, the green one, is without Riverbed deployed and how long it takes to complete various operations, downloading a PowerPoint, uploading a PowerPoint, or editing and save a work document. The yellow bar is the first time it's done with Steelhead, so new data. Here we're providing mostly network optimizations and some compression. But the orange bar, you can see how much faster, how much less data needs to go across that network based on repeated data. So if I access a file and then next day I need to pull it down and make a few changes, I will see that most of that data is the same, and therefore I'm going to get much faster access, much less bandwidth required to transfer that same data. This is shown on a T1 type network connection and latency that would be typically across the United States, but 100 milliseconds. Obviously, the more latency, the more dramatic the impact as well. So you can test it out in your own environment, but you can see that Steelhead can provide huge benefits in terms of wait time, and that makes a big, big difference between people deploying SharePoint and using it daily and making it part of their standard work and activities versus people saying, actually, SharePoint's too slow. I'd rather try something else. Maybe I'll put the files on a memory stick and send it via FedEx, or maybe I will go to some unsanctioned approach. IT departments certainly would frown on you going to Dropbox or Box.net with sensitive corporate information. So we really do want people to use the SharePoint, and if we can give them faster access with WAN optimization, that goes a long way towards making sure they're getting the results they need to feel comfortable with it. Another approach to this, if we've used Cascade to model and understand the network performance and troubleshoot bottlenecks, and we've used Steelhead WAN optimization to optimize the network connections people are going over to access it. Another area you may want to look at is how do we scale those servers as well. And here Stingray Traffic Manager, Riverbed's virtual application delivery controller technology, can help. And so Stingray really complements things we're doing with Steelhead by offloading some of the workload from that server, by being able to direct traffic to the appropriate location, by being able to prioritize and control it, and enables you to scale up and get better access to the SharePoint servers wherever we are, whatever geography. So having a virtual ADC, or application delivery controller, really does complement WAN optimization by giving you more scale and more control over the server access itself directly. And so a couple examples here of how Stingray Traffic Manager would work in a SharePoint environment. On the left there you see requests will come in. The virtual server is going to apply some optimizations and rules. It's going to look at the connections. It's going to balance the sessions across the different servers and respond back appropriately. Again, any rules can be applied on the way in or the way out. And that really gives you a lot of control over that environment and a lot of ability to customize the behavior in that environment. Maybe you want to make a change to part of that web page. You've updated your copyright, and rather than go and rewrite it within all the code, you could just apply a quick rule within Stingray and have that piece of the web page swapped out automatically on the fly. So great way to give you control of content as well as control of access, and give you more scalable server load balancing as well as more control and direction over where people are going with their connections to SharePoint. So a lot of different ways that we've been able to help here now. We've used Cascade to understand the environment. We've used Steelhead products to accelerate access for branch offices, mobile devices, remote sites. We've used Stingray to provide additional value, compression, caching, SSL, direction and control over that environment, and getting more scale out of it. One additional way we can provide is an add-on to the Stingray family, which is our Stingray Optimizer products. And if you think about Steelhead providing optimizations that are really working at the network level or at the application level, Optimizer is going to provide benefits that are really at the content level. So you have network protocol, you have application protocol, and then you have the content itself. And how is that application, like SharePoint, being accessed? How is the web page set up? What are the images and other components of it that we need to deliver to end users? And one important contrast I want to make here is while Steelhead is primarily a symmetric solution, that is, you'll have a Steelhead appliance or a virtual Steelhead or a cloud Steelhead or Steelhead mobile software, you'll have some piece of Steelhead technology on each end of the line. The Stingray products do not require that. They are single-ended solutions or asymmetric. So just having a Stingray traffic manager next to the Sharepoint server or the web server, having Stingray Optimizer next to that server provides benefits to anybody accessing it, nothing required on their end of the line. But let me go into a little bit more depth on how Optimizer would provide benefits into a Sharepoint environment. You may look at your environment and you have your Sharepoint server. We can directly install Optimizer on that, or we can run it on a traffic manager instance now. And for that environment, we can very quickly configure and set this up, and it's going to then dynamically optimize that connection. It's going to do things like merging the files that make up the Sharepoint access, shrinking and compressing the file data itself, not doing deduplication the way Steelhead does, but doing compression of images or other components. It's also going to increase the caching on the client end. So if I'm accessing this through a web browser, most objects are set to expire nearly immediately. So if you go to revisit, you need to reload the entire file. We can extend that time on the client browser dynamically so that if I go to access my Sharepoint farm, most of that page will be the same the next day I visit it. Let's view that through a cache. Of course, if anything has changed, we'll get the fresh content, but if it's exactly the same, we don't need to move that across the network again. Not least, we can tune the page layout. So if you have a very complex Sharepoint page or interface or a website built on top of Sharepoint, let's immediately present the things that are most visible to the end user. So the view of Sharepoint loading faster is definitely experienced by the end user. So they'll get fewer round trips and overcome latency there. There'll be less data that needs to go across the network. They'll be able to get faster reloads with the caching of content that hasn't changed, and we'll be able to tune the page layout, show them first things first. And all of that provides a really big benefit. Again, here we can see up to 76% less reduction in load time, up to 43% less traffic. You could even lower your content delivery network costs. If you're paying a third-party provider to help you stage content around the world, maybe you have a public website that's been built on Sharepoint as the content management backend. Rather than paying that CDN provider for extra data transferred, we can use it to stage it and reduce that cost as well. So a lot of benefits here, and Optimizer is definitely a nice add-on component to the environment. So one thing I do want to clarify here, though, is you can use any of these pieces standalone. If you're looking just for visibility, you can deploy just Cascade. If you're looking just for WAN optimization, you can use just Steelhead components. If you would like to have the virtual ADC, the load balancing and scripting capabilities of Stingray Traffic Manager, or if you'd like to have the web content optimization capabilities of Stingray Optimizer, any one of these can be used standalone, or they can all be used in conjunction here. I've shown them all here together, from an appliance in a branch office for Steelhead to Steelhead Mobile on some laptops for people on the road, to Stingray in a branch office or a data center or next to the Sharepoint server and web servers, and even our Whitewater component, which can act as a cloud storage gateway for backup. So a lot of different pieces can be brought to bear here. And what I really want to emphasize here is not that we're making this environment complex. If anything, we're actually simplifying your administration and making it much easier for you to understand and diagnose and address performance issues in the environment. But the other thing we really want to call out is that this is a performance platform approach Riverbed is taking. And no other company in the market is quite taking such a holistic view to what are all the things we need to know and address to deliver the best possible performance for my Sharepoint environment. How do I make it manageable? How do I get the best results for users anywhere? And as a result, how do I get more cost savings on my IT time and staff? How do we get more productivity out of our end users and workers? How do we get a higher adoption rate of Sharepoint? There are a lot of benefits from addressing performance challenges at every layer, from network protocol to web protocol to the application behavior itself, all the way through scaling up those servers and directing traffic. And again, all these pieces together provide that performance platform approach that is really a unique approach Riverbed is taking. Now, so far we've focused primarily on Sharepoint in a private environment, so thinking mostly about customers managing Sharepoint in their own branch offices, in their own data centers. I do want to change the picture a little bit and talk about a popular option we're seeing more and more, which is people going to Microsoft and thinking about, what if you could host SharePoint for me? What if I take SharePoint as a software as a service or a public cloud service approach? And I know Microsoft is very keen on this type of approach. Our picture would change a little bit here then, because I'm probably running Microsoft in what's called the Office 365 environment. So rather than me setting up my own servers, my own storage, licensing directly SharePoint, I can instead have Microsoft provide all of that for me as a cloud-based service. And then it's accessible to my own employees, whether they're remote or in the office. It's accessible to external partners or customers if I want. And I can have access, again, still from mobile workers or branch offices or anywhere. We've changed our picture a little bit here if we're accessing Office 365. And what we've done really is to get better optimization in these environments, we've partnered up with a company called Akamai. Akamai is one of those content delivery network type of companies, but they also have some advantages here that fit very nicely with what Riverbed's doing on the Steelhead side. And part of that is their ability to find the fastest route across the network. The other is the ability to leverage their network or nodes of platforms all around the world, many of which right next door to where Microsoft Office 365 data centers are hosted. So if we have Steelhead WAN optimization connecting branch offices to data centers or mobile workers to data centers, we have Akamai with the network of nodes and data centers around the world right next to Microsoft Office hosting positions. What we can do is we can combine the two. And effectively what we're doing here is we're deploying a cloud version of our Steelhead appliance called Steelhead Cloud Accelerator into Akamai's network right next to the hosting location for Office 365. And that's going to then provide end-to-end optimization, not just on your private wide area network connection, but also across the public internet. We can also leverage Akamai's sure route capabilities and find the fastest access route, or where's the closest resource, and that is tested dynamically in real time. So if you're thinking at all about doing SharePoint in the cloud in Office 365, but you're worried about, hey, that gives me less control over network connections, hey, that may be further away from my end users, even people in my headquarters location will now be remote access to that Microsoft SharePoint instance. How do we get them the best possible access, the fastest possible access? Well, this combination of Steelhead appliances or Steelhead mobile software in your environment, along with our Steelhead Cloud Accelerator, which leverages Akamai's network, will give you the best possible results. But I should clarify here, you don't need a separate contract with Akamai. We've done that partnership for you. You can sign up directly with Riverbed and automatically get the fine-tuned performance even as you're leveraging Microsoft Office 365 environment. So a lot of great advantages and, again, a really unique approach. Nobody else on the market has taken quite this approach to being able to provide optimization for a public software as a service offering like Office 365. So if you want to go that direction, definitely something to check out is ensuring the same performance your people expect today in that cloud environment. And let me give you an example here. Here's a company called SKF. They make ball bearings, and they're headquartered in Sweden, but they have offices around the world. You might joke ball bearings make the world go round, but I won't do that because it's a horrible pun. Anyway, looking at the performance for their environment, again, they weren't too far from the European headquarters for where Office 365 is hosted, but then again, people accessing from Singapore are quite a long ways away. And if you look at the performance improvement they got in trying to access Office 365, without Riverbed, things could take 200 seconds or more, and being able to do it 52 times faster is very, very significant benefit. People aren't going to wait minutes and minutes for things to go, but if it shows up immediately, 50 times faster, 48 times faster, that's a big difference in them saying, yes, I can use this versus, no, I demand you don't go to Office 365. I want you to set up something here locally and manage it locally. So we're really a key enabler for people to get the right access. And I should emphasize here, it's not anything that Microsoft has done wrong in their deployment. It's just the constraints of distance and bandwidth. And again, we can address this and then therefore be a nice partner and give people an option to be able to adopt this type of solution. So with that, I'm going to shift gears again a little bit and just give you a little bit of background and walk you through a couple of specific scenarios. I think many people on the call are familiar with Riverbed, but I do want to emphasize a little bit about who we are. We had over $700 million in annual revenue last year. We have quite a bit of cash on hand, and we're a publicly traded company, so a very stable partner, and work very closely with Microsoft, as we noted. We've had great success around the world. We have 17,000 plus customers of Riverbed deployed around the world, and approximately 50% of the market share for WAN optimization, and are positioned extremely well with our different products in different areas like network performance management or virtual ADC space. You can look at our support, and again, if you're thinking about a global environment that you're running for Sharepoint, being able to provide award-winning support around the world, having parts depots and engineers who can speak up to 18 languages, really, really strong position. In fact, our support has recently won a J.D. Power and Associates Award, and there's very few tech companies that have been able to achieve that for their quality of support. We've also had a Tech Support Industry Association's award in support. So that, alongside with our tight partnership and our participation in Microsoft's protocol optimization licensing program, our position as a gold partner with them, and others just guarantee that you will get the best possible results in real-world deployments. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's look at a couple of real-world examples. I wanted to share what other people have done so you can get a feel for it. Here's a company called Avanade. They do IT consulting, and they operate around the world. They have 22 different offices and 5 different data centers supporting that. And you can look at the quote here, and that probably sums it up very nicely, saying we're seeing the actual results we wanted to achieve when we started, and we're seeing them with complete transparency to our end users. So that's very important, that there's nothing required from an end user point of view. They're getting the benefits they want, and it's really, really seamless to the environment. They have 57% less WAN traffic. They're getting, for Sharepoint specifically, not just WAN traffic overall, 86% improvement, and 87% for web traffic as a whole. So benefits for them is quite a bit of savings. They're saving money on network connections. They didn't have to upgrade networks to have more bandwidth. They're saving money by not having to deploy new hardware, servers, and storage around the world to support Sharepoint in each of those 22 offices. They're saving money on administration time, and at the same time, they are really enjoying all the benefits that Sharepoint project was bringing for them. And if you think of the nature of their business as a consulting firm, making sure people have access to documents, proposals, projects, all those different files that make up the intellectual property, the human capital of their service, faster access really translates directly to better performance for their business. And to find a cost-effective way for their consultants to collaborate and work seamlessly around the clock and around the world really gives them fantastic results. And you can see the financial value, ROI, in a matter of months is really, really compelling for them. So another example for you, I'll take a couple minutes to take a look at Einstein Noah's restaurant group. People know Einstein Bagels or Noah's around there, kind of casual restaurants out around the world, but 600 of them in 36 states and D.C. One of the challenges they had with Sharepoint, though, was they didn't see the people using it in all these restaurant locations. A lot of small retail places, but people were saying, hey, can you upgrade bandwidth to our location if you want us to use the central repository? And some of their use case was they wanted to do more training. They wanted run books. These are franchise type locations. They want everybody to be delivering the same experience for their end users, and they wanted to do it efficiently for each of those locations by people accessing exactly the same procedures and manuals in terms of how to prepare the food and how to serve the customers and everything else. But if it was too slow, then people weren't accessing that information. And again, you can see a nice quote here saying documents used to take 20 minutes to download. If you're busy serving customers, waiting 20 minutes usually is an option. Now from Sharepoint, they take a maximum of 16 seconds. So obviously, big time improvement there from really unusable to, yeah, this is great, we love it. And they were able to deploy Steelhead Mobile, in fact, to 400-plus locations and distribution centers, and even people traveling around training or checking on the each of the store locations and give them that fast access from anywhere. You can look again at the financial value for them, over $600,000 savings in the first year. A lot of that in avoiding network bandwidth upgrades. Again, the number of locations was really stressing them there. But also reduced training costs. Managers didn't have to travel around to get training. They could download and access and view video file training on demand when they wanted it in their location. So faster access, up to 75 times faster. Their payback period was just in a little over 2 months here with the Steelhead Mobile, and they're getting faster, more effective results. So managing their change, managing their employee training, making sure everybody is running the restaurants just as they should. Another great example of how Sharepoint and Riverbed together were solving a key problem for them. One last example I want to give you is Golder Associates. This is an environmental consulting firm. They have 150 plus locations worldwide, over 5,000 employees. They were already using Steelhead appliances, but they were finding that mobile workers needed better access. And again, you can see here being able to get access for anywhere is really important to them. It says they're pleasantly surprised when we ran our tests. Mobile performance is exactly comparable to the Steelhead appliances. So access to SharePoint files up to 100 times faster. When they were backing up their SharePoint files using VeritasNet backup in this case, 40% less data had to go across the network. And again, really great benefits in terms of more collaboration for people around the world. Obviously essential to their business. Consultants in environmental industries are all very specialized and also probably pretty highly paid by comparison. And so if you can get them faster access, get them working together more efficiently, their projects get to market, they can get their bids out faster, they can make sure those consultants are as efficient as possible and deliver better services for their workers as they're out traveling and visiting sites and visiting their clients or government agencies they need to pass environmental impact reports and those types of things. That consolidated SharePoint environment now can deliver exactly what they're looking for. So 3 different examples for you there. Just wanted to give you a little bit of a feel of some of the benefits we have. I know these examples are slightly biased towards the Steelhead environments. That's probably the most common deployment scenario for us today. But more and more we're hearing from each of these types of customers that they want to address not just network performance, but they want to better understand the SharePoint deployment. They want to look at how they can consolidate it, how they can protect it, how they can scale out those servers in the data center, and how they can give better performance, not just for internal workers, but also for external visitors to SharePoint or SharePoint-based websites. So with that, I'm actually going to invite Bill back onto the call and see if he has any recommendations about, what's the best way to look at SharePoint deployments, what's the best way to consider improving the performance of those. You there, Bill?
Yeah, so a couple of things you need to look at is really it's about establishing your goals. What are you looking to do with SharePoint? What kind of scenarios are you looking to address? And really, what do you look like from an organizational perspective in terms of just your layout? So data center footprint is imperative, but it's also imperative to understand the way you work. Where do your users reside? And that really takes us back to the deployment models and determining where your users reside, how they're clustered around your data centers, and really what the network looks like between you and your users. Largely because bandwidth is something that you can buy. However, latency is something that you just have to accept. So it's important to really understand the latency, and likely in many cases less important to understand the bandwidth. You also want to understand what your RPO and your RTO objectives are, or your recovery points and your recovery times. How much data can you afford to lose, and how long can you be down before the environment becomes more available. And the reason you need to understand that is because it will also dictate what your deployment model looks like as you think about service continuity management. You also want to design and validate. So start off with a proof of concept. Start off with one clustered or satellite user base, a remote user base. Determine what you can do from an optimization perspective to assist those users and facilitate their needs, and then slowly cascade that proof of concept out to more pilot user groups and determine the value from that perspective. And it's also from a WAN perspective, what are you looking to accomplish and what are the costs versus benefits? So that's also an important thing to understand. A lot of people spend a lot of time trying to re-architect their network. But again, That's something that bandwidth can assist with. However, from a latency perspective, it's just not something that you can overcome because it's dictated by physics. So it's very important to understand what those latencies look like, understand what the boundaries are that you're working within, and then trying to address those users from a number of different methods. And I think you've heard of some of those methods throughout the course of this presentation that can assist in mitigating some of those risks. And then lastly, one of the things that you want to do is from a business case perspective, it's about SLAs. And SLAs are very important as part of your overall continuity management scenario. So SLAs in many cases, that's uptime, but it's also performance. So a lot of people silo SLA as in nines, the number of nines that are achievable through the deployment. However, it goes much more beyond just the number of nines, and a lot of times it also touches upon performance. So it's also important to understand that. And again, the faster things are able to be accessed, the quicker people get work done and the more productive they become. And that's the important thing about speed. Speed not only is important to just operating a platform, it's not only important to being able to maintain competitive advantage, but it's also important to your users to remain productive, because the more performance they have to complete their work quickly, the better off they are in terms of just pure productivity. So those are some of the important considerations and recommendations to think about from a Sharepoint perspective, and I'm sure we can add a lot more from a Riverbed perspective, and just in terms of what they've seen in working with these customers that these 3 case studies have just covered.
Great. Thanks for that, Bill. I think what we'll do now is we'll look at some of the questions that have come in, and a reminder, if you're on the phone and have a question you'd like to ask, please feel free to send that in now. We'll take as many as we can. I see a question here from Rolf, who was clearly paying attention and looking at some of our charts and results. He wanted to know, was PowerPoint optimization more efficient than doc? And I think that may have been a little bit artifact of the test files we had, but it may also have to do with the fact that a PowerPoint file typically has a lot of heavy images in it. If you go to this presentation, for example, when I've been sharing it around our office and having people look at it, we may have changed only a few words here or there, or inserted names and titles on the first slide, but most of those images on all these pretty pictures and logos throughout it aren't changed, so you're going to get really great results on that. If you think more of typical access of a Word file, there may be much more significant changes, or there may be just less weight overhead in being able to share the information within that file. So it may be slightly to do with just the test files we had in that case, but it may also have to do with the nature of the content of those files and how much it lends itself to deduplication in these particular cases. So hopefully that helps give a better feel for that. But I guess my final thought on that is we always recommend you go ahead and take a look and try it out in your own environment. Next question coming in here, Todd wanted to know about Cascade and the costs and the appliances, how many are needed, and are they only in the data center? And the answer here is, as always, it varies. Cascade has some very cost-efficient approaches that start with our Cascade Express platform, which is a single box that can look at the entire environment, and it's basically collecting flow information, and you can deploy just one of these in a data center location if you want, and direct that network information from routers, switches, steelhead WAN optimization devices, et cetera, and direct that all over to your Cascade Express and have it provide top-level reporting on where the information is going and troubleshooting information. We can go to a much broader deployment if you want. If you have multiple data centers or multiple locations where you're hosting SharePoint servers, we can take a bigger approach with Cascade and separate out profilers, gateways, and sensors. Gateways collect the information, profilers do some of the analytics against it, and sensors could be deployed in any location with the SharePoint server to collect some more of the application-specific response information. So a couple of different approaches. We also have within Cascade the Shark family, which basically does packet capture. Many people here are probably familiar with Wireshark. Shark is a formalized appliance to be able to do that at much greater scale and then view it through our Cascade Pilot console. So if you want to do not just looking at flow information of traffic on the network, but actually do packet capture, so you could go in and use it for debug or troubleshooting or even audit and compliance type reasons, you can add in the Shark components of our Cascade family. So the answer is really, it depends how much you want to do with it, but we have a really nice integrated solution from looking across the enterprise at all the broad flows of information end-to-end from end user to the SharePoint instance down to being able to drill down and see specific packet capture information as well. It just depends upon what information you want, where you want to collect it from. There may be different prices or different architectures you decide to go with. Let's see what other questions we have out here. Difference between Cascade and Express and Cascade, are they different products? Tom, basic answer is that at the core they do much the same thing. Cascade is able to provide a slightly deeper solution and a slightly more scalable solution by having dedicated appliances, as I mentioned, separating out the analytics from the gateway from the sensors that are measuring the information. So different components on that. If you do want more details, I might recommend you visit riverbed.com or reach out to authorized Riverbed partner in your area, and they can look at see which particular set of products are best for you. Let's see. Other questions on the line? How would we improve the performance and bandwidth where we're running Citrix applications in remote offices? So that's a great question coming in here from Aaron. And it's a good point that not everybody is running traditional full desktops. They're not doing a traditional client-server type approach. They may be using virtual desktop infrastructures. And I'll broaden the question a little bit from Citrix to Microsoft VDI as well, and running in RDP environments or others. But anytime you're doing desktop or application virtualization, that's basically an encapsulation of this environment. And again, if you're trying to run it across a wide area network, you may be running into exactly the same constraints of both latency and bandwidth. And so our ability to do data reduction on that, our ability to accelerate those sessions and connections with the VDI environment, and our ability to prioritize that traffic appropriately are all very important uses. Think if you're trying to download a file because you're running to a meeting. It's very important you get that file quickly, so you want to prioritize that business traffic, again, over maybe background activities like printing a document. If that takes an extra 5 seconds to reach the printer, well, nobody's going to be bothered by that, versus users just browsing the internet or reading news sites or other types of things. So being able to do priority against even the individual flows of Citrix traffic or Microsoft traffic or any other traffic on that network really can provide a big advantage, and that quality of service capability as well as optimization of VDI is something that's built directly into our Steelhead appliances and WAN optimization platform. Let me see here. Other questions. What do we do to speed up SharePoint.Microsoft.com? This is a great question, actually. Somebody may have some behind-the-scenes knowledge here, because actually Microsoft themselves uses our Stingray Optimizer products on their own public SharePoint site. If you go visit http://sharepoint.microsoft.com and you want to go read more about SharePoint and the deployments and use cases around the world, wherever you are in the world, you're going to get faster results on that, and that's because Microsoft themselves are using Riverbed's Stingray Optimizer product on that site. So as I mentioned before, its ability to compress images, its ability to serve up the first parts of the page first, its ability to compress and keep that cached in your browser, all of that makes for a better viewing experience as you visit Microsoft's own SharePoint site. So that's a great testimonial and a great way of showing the products working very closely together. And there's a follow-up question here from another individual asking, Optimizer could help our SharePoint Central deployment. And again, a great point. Whether you choose to go with Steelheads or whether you choose to go with Stingray Optimizer, they're different approaches. They're complementary approaches, but the things Optimizer is doing to make that web access for SharePoint just more efficient for users anywhere, the fact that it is, again, sort of a single-ended approach, people don't need anything deployed on their side, does mean they're going to get faster browsing and faster access to that SharePoint site itself. Let me see. It looks like there's just one or two more questions on the line. Feel free to send in more if you like. Let's see here. Bernard wants to know, do we have engagements where we interpret Cascade results? And this is a great question. One thing I wanted to do here is put a shout out to our professional services and our channel partners. A lot of our value-add partners can really help you get a baseline understanding of your environment. They can provide it as a professional services or consulting engagement to look at your SharePoint deployment in major offices around the world and really help you understand what set of solutions is going to provide the biggest impact in improving that performance. So you can test things like Aptimizer on your own. You can just visit our website, riverbed.com, and pull down a test tool and see what kind of benefit that might give you for SharePoint. But if you really want to sort of baseline and get best practices and advice and wisdom, certainly turn to Riverbed or Microsoft or our professional services groups and our channel partners, and they're going to be able to give you that sort of insight and wisdom for your own specific environment. So with that, I think we've come pretty close to the top of the hour. I guess at this point I'd like to particularly thank Bill for joining us today and his insights in some of the challenges of running SharePoint. Obviously, the key takeaway is SharePoint is a fantastic application. It's got huge benefits for productivity in businesses around the world. It's got many different use cases, but those are only as good as the user experience in viewing them. So through no fault of Microsoft's, physical constraints around the world and distance can sometimes slow it down, and Riverbed has a wide range of solutions to help you address that, so you're getting the best possible SharePoint experience for your workers. So again, thank you everybody for taking the time to join us today. I hope it's been a useful and informative call for you, and reach out if you want more information in any area. Thank you. Have a great day.